Two guys of Minnesota sports flowing in their veins. Mackie and Judd on SKOR North and SKORNorth.com.
Reckless speculation.
Man, we're all on fumes after trying to break the SKOR North YouTube channel last night. Judd's hockey show and Flagrant Howls. Unprecedented. Streaming at the same time last night. Two separate therapy sessions for tortured Minnesota sports fans.
Would have been nice to get one win. Just one.
Well,
here's
I mean, the Wolves had a real shot there for a while, but
yeah, you know what? They didn't win. Here's where we screwed up. We should have done 3 channels because at least the Twins post game would have been talking about a big victory in Fenway Park, albeit in April.
that is true. We should have done the celebratory Twins one first, but alas, we were there for you guys late into the night. We're all kind of on fumes here. Doogie is up early with us on this Thursday morning for some reckless speculation Thursday action. You can find him as part of the 5 Eyewitness News sports team. And Doogs, first of all, hello. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
How
on
are you?
fumes, literally, right, Phil, on this 420 day?
Well, I hadn't thought about that aspect of it, but yeah, I guess you could say that there's fumes all over the place.
Absolutely. But happy Reckless Speculation Thursday. Appreciate you guys moving some stuff around. I'm hanging out with Cole Aldrich. How about that for a name drop? I'm heading over to Cole's house in a little bit for a deeper dive on Game 2, which I presume we'll get to at some point here relatively soon. But thank you for adjusting your schedules.
Absolutely. So we will get into sort of the nuts and bolts of Game 2 and Anthony Edwards putting up an historic performance in that he was the youngest player ever to score 40-plus points and knock down 5 3-pointers or more in a playoff game. But you came on this show a week ago. We're going to go big picture Wolves here for a second as they're down 2-0. They're dealing with just a lot of big roster questions. Karl Anthony Towns with yet another playoff no-show last night. And you came on this show a week ago and said, don't be surprised if an Eastern Conference job opens up and Tim Connelly is associated with it. And we were all like, oh, that's interesting. And then in the last 24, 48 hours, the Wizards job opens up. And some of your other colleagues in the media are saying kind of the same thing, that, hey, there's a connection. Tim Connelly used to live there. He actually worked for the Wizards and maybe interviewed. You can tell us the backstory. But I guess my question is, would Tim Connelly really light this match less than a year ago, with more questions now than existed a year ago, right? Would he really light this match, leverage the Timberwolves to double his salary, and then leave?
Well, Phil, remember, he lit the match. He has a little bit of ownership equity based on the team's success. He thought the Rudy Gobert trade would work incredibly well. Hopefully Siri or Alexa in the background isn't annoying you guys. I forgot to turn her off. So she's talking in the background about some note about April 20th. I don't think it was wacky tobacco related, but
Tim Connelly was with the Denver Nuggets.
Tim Connelly lit this match on 420.
Yeah. Light the match.
Absolutely. So, Phil, this is the job, the Wizards job that I was alluding to. He did work for Washington way back when. I remember, before Flip passed away, when Flip was with the Wizards. That's how Flip, Ryan Saunders became close with Tim. I remember Tim's name coming up where Flip's like, this guy is really, really good. And he's super passionate about Wizards basketball. He's from the Baltimore, D.C. area. His wife is from the Baltimore, D.C. area. All right, so he ends up leaving Washington, right? Eventually gets the Denver job. In 2019, he interviews. The job is open. Ernie Grunfeld let go by the Wizards. The Wizards do an open search. It wasn't just automatic that Tommy Shepard internally would get elevated. Okay, so Tim interviews with Ted Leonsis, the Wizards owner. The word is the job in 2019 was offered to Tim Connelly, but they lowballed him. It wasn't a 5-year deal like he got here. It certainly wasn't for close to the money he got here. So he turned it down. After that, he held court with the Denver media. Yes, Tim Connelly has actually held court with the media. Actually did it before Game 1, but few and far between here. He has run from interview opportunities. I don't get it. He hasn't turned down every single interview opportunity. But hey, now maybe we were spoiled because Gerson Rosas literally did every interview request. But Tim Connelly, I tried to get him for a TV sit down in November, December, January, February, March. No. I don't know if it's the on-camera thing. It was weird. It was very weird. But he has done some interviews. It's not like he hasn't done anything, but he's been largely invisible. This job, I have no doubt in my mind, Phil, appeals to him, to his family. But could he leave after lighting the franchise on fire, as you said, after one season? I was under the impression, I'll be completely frank, when I tossed out that speculation, it fit the Thursday theme last week, reckless speculation. When I tossed that information out, may have even tossed it out initially 9 days ago, 2 Tuesdays ago. But when I tossed it out, I was under the impression that Tommy Shepard would get one more year, that the Wizards wouldn't make this move. I've known Tommy a little bit. I haven't texted or spoken with him in the last 12 to 18 hours, but I imagine 10 days, 11 days after the Wizards season ended, that he thought he was in the clear. That if this move was to happen, it would have happened 2, 3, 4 days after the Wizards season ended, not a week and a half later. So I bet there's some shell shock there. I have no doubt that the Wizards will inquire on Tim. They will come after Tim. The question is, will Tim reciprocate?
And will they?
I will also add,
yeah.
My understanding is the way that Tim Connelly's contract is written, there's a bit more flexibility to escape Minnesota if he wanted to after the second year, not after the first year. Now, hey, if Tim wants that job, if they offer him the job, I'm sure the Wizards and Wolves could work out some sort of trade compensation. But the Wolves can deny a lot here. The Wolves have power right now. My understanding is in a year, the Wolves don't have as much power. That's why I just thought it would be next summer, not now, that this talk would come up. But here we are. I'm just telling you, I have no doubt in my mind. Now, they may end up going after Trajan Langdon. They'll make a call on you, Jerry, with the Raptors. But I'm just telling you, Tim Connelly, I'm positive, is on Ted Leonce's short list.
All right. That being said, with how things are transpiring, and just from the close-up view, we'll get to the loss last night soon here. But do you sense that there would be a definite Timberwolves saying, no, Washington, get away from our guy right now? Or with what's transpired here, would there be you know what? If you want to leave, we'll work out a package. We'll get compensation, to your point. And who ultimately, this is such a Wolves thing, who's the point man? Is Glenn the point man right now because he technically still owns the team? Because it was Laurie and A-Rod who brought Connelly, here. I mean, Glenn hadn't heard of Connelly or thought that he was the coffee boy. So who exactly has the hammer right now on saying, go ahead and explore, or don't?
Well, Glenn Taylor has the hammer with influence from Ethan Casson, Ryan Tankey, certainly Mark Laurie, Alex Rodriguez. But ultimately, it's Glenn. Glenn is the majority owner. But you're right. If it was just Glenn Taylor, if Mark Laurie and to some extent A-Rod, but certainly right. Mark Laurie, if Mark Laurie was not in this picture, in this equation, Tim Connelly never comes here. Trust me, Glenn was not going to pursue Tim Connelly. So Mark Laurie drove that bus. I'm just telling you, we've seen so much change here year after year, seemingly year after year, but just go back how many years, how many different front office regimes, coaches. We need some continuity around here. If I'm the Wolves, I'm blocking this, right? The entire front office has been remade. He brings in Matt Lloyd. We'll see on Sachin Gupta. Had a chance to escape a year ago. Well, there was some interest, mutual interest with Houston. Decides to stay. His wife delivers babies here in town. I don't know if she's ready to uproot, but I'll be curious to see what happens with Sachin Gupta. But, really outside of Gupta and Manny Rohan, who handles a lot of the salary cap, Tim brought in a bunch of people, including his brother, by the way. His brother is on the payroll, Joe Connelly, right? But he reworked the front office, bringing in Dell Demps as well. So I just don't know if the Wolves are ready to say, okay, Tim, see ya. Now, do they regret not elevating Sachin? Really? But, Sachin didn't do anything at the trade deadline. Sachin just stayed back. But, do I think Sachin Gupta makes that Rudy Gobert trade? Heck no. I don't. I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't think Sachin makes that trade for whatever that is worth. But would the Wolves be comfortable saying, you know what? We regret not elevating Sachin to begin with. Tim, go ahead. Or would they say, you know what? We need some of that continuity. Tim, you're under contractual control. You don't have the hammer. You don't have the option. That's not right now. Yeah, maybe in a year you have some power, but not right now.
Yeah.
If the Wolves say, nope, Tim, you're our guy. I'm inclined. I mean, this is still early, right? I mean, this is a story that's 12 hours old, and I'm telling you, I'm pretty positive that Ted Leonsis has Tim on his short list. But I'm inclined to think right now the Wolves would say, Tim, you just can't leave after 1 year.
I know there's a lot of really emotional fans that are just out on Tim Connelly. They feel like he came in, he's an idiot, and he fleeced the Timberwolves, and he made this trade. I'm gonna take a more reasonable, sensible stance on this and say,
well, good. You should, Phil, because
okay.
I'm just telling you, the man has a ton of fans in the league. He is highly respected, and I think enough knowledgeable fans will admit, you know what? That man knows a thing or two.
And that's the thing. It's like, could that trade wind up being a bad trade? Yes, but it's always kind of felt like, why would you make the trade without some sort of backup plan if it doesn't work perfectly? It kind of felt to me like this is a ballsy trade that we know could blow up in our faces. So that's why we have the Karl Anthony Towns escape plan or the Chris Finch, firing escape plan, right? I guess maybe I'm just morbidly curious, but I'm curious to see, let's say they get swept here. And I actually think there's it looks like they found something in the second half. They came firing back in that second half. I don't know if I'm fully standing by my Wolves in 7 anymore, but I'd like to see some home games here. But if they get beat in 4 or 5 and it looks discombobulated like it's looked for the majority of the series, I think there are big moves coming this summer. And I am curious, morbidly, to see Tim Connelly attempt to make those moves. I'm kind of with you. Like, I don't want you're gonna hire a guy, double his salary, and then he's just going to move on after a year. How about one more year of continuity to see what he does? That Conley trade, by the way, was a great trade. And D'Angelo Russell last night, a 2-for-11 clunker. He's now shooting 34% in his playoff career. He has been atrocious in big games for the Timberwolves and the Lakers. Mike Conley has been a steady veteran beacon for this team. So that was a savvy trade. I'm just curious to see what he does. What's the second shoe to drop? What's the part 2 to last summer's blockbuster?
Well, I'll also add, by the way, Russell did have the good game against the Clippers in the play-in, right? So he wasn't a complete no-show in games beyond the regular season last year, but he stunk against Memphis last year.
His job is supposed to play like he's supposed to play like that.
Correct. Based on the money he's making, yeah. I mean, he has not come close to meeting expectations.
Yeah.
He doesn't like playing Memphis, right? That's pretty clear. But yeah, I mean, that trade has been a win. Nobody would deny that. Heck, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you'll get him back as a restricted free agent next year at a reasonable number, right? Don't forget about him in that trade. Don't forget about Kyle Anderson. Where does Kyle Anderson rank, Phil? All time. I know it's not an impressive list, but when talking about the best free agent signings in Wolves history, 30-plus years, Kyle Anderson is where? Top 3, top 2.
It's a really good free agent.
That's a Tim Connelly move. Josh Minott, I'm just telling you, Josh Minott is going to be a rotational player for this team as soon as next year. We'll see on Wendell Moore Jr., but they hit on that second round pick from Memphis. I'm just telling you that. They absolutely did. I think Luka Garza is back next year on a standard deal. Looks like they hit on that move on the 2-way contract. So really, outside of the Gobert move, heck, Phil, Walker Kessler is a stud. Yeah, Tim Connelly drafted Walker Kessler, right? Now, if he knew that Walker would be this good this soon, of course you don't make the Gobert trade. But he hit on Walker Kessler. Tim Connelly knows what the heck he is doing. There is some sort of escape plan. I do think, Phil, if they had lost, heck, it seems like forever ago, but 6 days ago to the Oklahoma City Thunder in that playing game at Target Center, I think there would have been a better chance of something monumental happening this summer.
Yeah.
I just wonder, Phil, they can fall back on whether fans want to hear it or not. We never really, outside of the first, 5 games of the season, we never really had our full roster. Cat misses 52 games. Taurean Prince misses 20 games. Jordan McLaughlin misses a ton of games. Jalen Noel, who won't be back. I mean, that's a foregone conclusion. He'll leave this summer as a free agent, but he ends up missing toward the end of the year, 16, 17 games. Then Naz Reid gets hurt. Rudy Gobert ended up missing, 6, 7, 8 games throughout the season. They just never had their full complement of guys that I don't know this 100%, Phil, but I'm just starting to think, okay, they'll justify losing in 4 or 5, maybe 7, or maybe they win in 7, Phil. Maybe your prediction comes to fruition. I think at this point the series is ending in 5. I thought pregame Sunday before game 1, the series would go 6. Then I saw game 1, and I'm like, okay, it'll end in 5. Yeah. Yes, last night is confirmation, at least in my mind, that they will win one of these games tomorrow or Sunday at Target Center, force it back to Denver, but I think the series ends in 5. But whether it ends in even 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, or they win in 7, I'm just telling you, I'm starting to think that they can justify running this thing back based on the injuries. Then the escape plan, if needed, happens a year from now, which would be a Karl Anthony Towns trade.
Do you want to do that, though? Because the running this thing back, we saw one thing last night that to me just continues to stand out occasionally, and I think it would stand out more if you put more on his plate, and that is Ant. That performance in the second half was nothing short of incredible. And his attitude going into the game I absolutely loved, which is, I was not aggressive enough, I'm going to be aggressive as hell, and that came to fruition. I feel like, though, that there is a certain part of Ant that far too often sort of stands aside to wait for the other veterans to do their job. Yeah. And then he sees that they aren't, and he gets pissed off. I think he really has to get pissed to take control at times. So do you want to stand pat, or do you want to pull a ripcord on a trade of, let's say, a star talent who doesn't necessarily show up like Ant can? Because I think the more that you put on Ant's plate, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. We've learned, Darren, that the more that you put on the Cat's plate, you're disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, Cat's been a no-show. Phil, you had the tweet last night about all the no-shows for Cat, whether in the Houston playoff series, the Memphis playoff series.
It's 8 and 16. 8 out of 16 absolute clunkers. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, he's had some really big games. He had the big 30-whatever point, 13-rebound performance last year in one of the Memphis wins. So he has shown up. He hasn't been a complete disappearing act. But yeah, when you're a super max player, and hey, he was very worthy of being all-NBA third team a year ago. He earned the super max. He was fantastic. But yes, we expect a ton more. He has been horrible these 2 games. Heck, how about the way Jeff Green, that first offensive foul for Cat last night, just baited him in to that. It's like, Cat, come on. Like, Jeff Green baited you. You lower your shoulder. Offensive foul. Like, Cat, you need to be smarter. I will say, though, Judd, like, to me, Cat, the last, 15, 20 games since he came back, that, Atlanta game, whatever that was, 10, 12 games ago, Cat has deferred to Ant for large portions of games. And so you still need the right complementary piece. And I think Cat can be that. That Cat is willing to be the Robin to Ant's Batman.
Well, he wasn't even a Robin. They could have used a Robin last night.
Yeah. Well, certainly they could have used anybody outside of
Ant. He was the Penguin. He was the Joker.
No, he's the Joker.
He was.
He was Two-Face.
But I can see a full season of Mike Conley Jr., his influence for a training camp, a preseason. They have the overseas trip in October for the preseason, so incredible team bonding next October on an overseas trip. I can just see them. I'm just telling you, whether you agree or not, because, hey, depending on what the offer is, I'd listen on Cat. Like I'm telling you, Dallas 100% would be in on Cat. The New York Knicks 100% would be on Cat. So if you can concoct some trade scenarios, I'm sure other teams as well, maybe Toronto, there's a few others that come to mind, but certainly Dallas, certainly New York, heck, Phoenix, if the Clippers end up winning this first-round series, would they trade Ayton, some other pieces? Do they have enough pieces? I guess is a fair question. But I'm just telling you, there would be a good amount of interest in Cat if you wanted to make the move this summer. but I'm inclined to think that they wait another year, run this thing back with a full season of Mike Conley Jr.
It's just to me, it's interesting, and I have sort of vowed. The audience knows where I stand on Karl Anthony Towns after Game 3 a year ago against Memphis. I think I called him a clown 9 times on the post game show. So like the audience knows my frustration with Karl Anthony Towns and just his lack of emotional intelligence.
You motivated him though. Was it Game 4? Was that the Jordan McLaughlin game also last year?
Dude,
but was it Game 4?
Play at a high level all the time.
Was that the 34-point, 13-rebound game? So
Yeah.
you motivated him.
Good. I mean, but he shouldn't need to listen to criticism on social media and YouTube and whatnot. But I guess my question would be, if you're having conversations now internally, Tim Connelly or whoever takes over if he goes to Washington, and you think, wow, this Cat thing. He's just not the 1A player that we thought. Maybe he's not even a 1B, but he's being paid like it. But let's get the band back together and run it back. I guess my question would be, it's been 8 years. What are you still unsure about when it comes to Cat? What is there to be decided in the 9th year that hasn't been decided in the last 3 years or the first 8 years for Karl Anthony Towns? Do you really need to see another year of his value diminishing?
Yeah,
That's my question.
The value would still be there. They could get back a pretty enticing trade package, but he's no longer the alpha. We know who the alpha is. He doesn't need to be the alpha, right? And so, as long as he's adjusting to that role, and I think he did a good job from that Atlanta game on. I think he's done a good job of really deferring to Ant, that this truly now is Ant's team at 21 years old.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, they can justify by looking at the landscape of the Western Conference now, this was such a weird year. Will that really happen again next year? But that, truthfully, they were just a few wins away from their preseason goal of a top 4 seed in the Western Conference, home court advantage in the first round. Those 10 losses to the Spurs and Rockets and Hornets and Pistons, right? And Blazers. Are you really going to lose those 10 games again next year? Yeah, maybe you lose a few, but not all 10. Are you really going to blow with Mike Conley Jr. now? All those double-digit leads, second in the NBA behind Portland, that will adjust itself enough next year that if they can just find a way to keep these guys healthy, now that's another big question, right? There's no proof that they can, but if they can, that the core of this roster is good enough to be a top 4 team in the Western Conference.
Interesting. If they keep playing the way that they've played for the majority of the series, they're going to be golfing pretty soon, Declan. So if the Wolves have to make tee times this summer, or maybe even next week, where would you recommend they go?
I would go to the Meadows at Mystic Lake, of course. Why wouldn't you go? I mean, Cat, you want to see the ball go in the hole here? We can dunk some balls, maybe.
Here's what it looks like to put a ball in a hole right here.
Just a couple of guys making putts. This was Doogs. They don't believe me when I say this. That was one take. And I know you laugh. Go ahead. Yuck it up, because I'll be at the Meadows at Mystic Lake, okay? Golfthemeadows.com.
Sinking putts and finger guns. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
102, but a par on 16. Let's go. Golfthemeadows.com to stay up to date on tee time information and the frequent player card, plus the Meadows Bar and Grill. Go to golfthemeadows.com to stay up to date on tee times.
Let's empty the Wolves bag here, and then we can transition into, and we'll have next week to talk Vikings too, but we are a week away from the NFL draft. So go ahead, Dukes. If you got any Wolves-related steam left to blow off here, fire away.
No, not necessarily. Just reminded last night the love we lost back in 2016, Jamal Murray. Right? I mean, we can criticize the Wolves all we want, but how incredible was that shot making?
Was it Chris Dunn? Did we take Chris Dunn as a franchise?
Yeah. Now, it may have been inevitable that Murray would have headed to Chicago in the Jimmy Butler trade.
Yeah.
Right? But John Calipari, the Kentucky coach, pre-draft was screaming at Tom Thibodeau. He was saying, Tom, Cat needs Jamal. Jamal wants to be a Timberwolf. He's from Canada. He wants to be there in Minnesota. It came down to Jamal Murray and Chris Dunn. They chose poorly. They chose wrong. So, yeah, just a reminder last night, watching his dominance. Although, the difficult degree of some of those shots, I mean, heck, I just thought it was incredible shot making, right? And, hey, you look at that first half last night, the Wolves missed 10 three-pointers. Go back and watch all 10 misses. I thought 6. You want to debate 5, fine, but I thought 6 were really wide open looks. Like, just make 3 of those, maybe 4 of those wide open looks, right? But you still had the game there for the taking, up 1, 6.5 minutes to go, right? But then Jamal he went off. So, I mean, I would say, just coming off, last night here being fresh in my mind at 8:57 a.m. Central, just reminded of how much I loved Jamal Murray pre-draft. Not as much like January. I remember being in love with Buddy Hield. Then I turned a corner. Like March, April, May, I'm like, the Wolves need Jamal Murray.
It's a good player,
Yet they chose wrong on Jamal. A couple other notes. Jorge Polanco told us at CHS Field yesterday he's good to go. Now, whether the Twins make the move as soon as tomorrow, so he's in the lineup tomorrow at Target Field for the start of that National Series, or they wait a day or two, Jorge Polanco, good to go. Alex Kirilloff declined our interview request, but the fact he has elevated up from Fort Myers to St. Paul is encouraging. I don't know if there's an obvious roster move there, though. Like, to me, presumably Eddie Julian goes down, Polanco up. Do you make the move on Castro for Kirilloff? Like, what is the logical move on Kirilloff? But they'll wait a little bit. Like, Alex Kirilloff's activation addition to the Twins 26-man roster is not imminent. Jorge's is. Gophers women's basketball, Dawn Plitzowait, the new coach, loses a recruit. Maddie Wilkie, a transfer from Wisconsin, visited here, double-digit scorer for the Badgers last year, but she chose the University of Utah. So that is Dawn's first big recruiting loss. Gophers men's basketball has a recruit on campus today, a Bryant transfer. His name is Charles Pride. On the Vikings, still continue to hear that it's when, not if, Dalvin Cook will be an ex-Viking. Not as entirely sure. Maybe on Za'Darius. I mean, fully willing to admit, yeah, Za'Darius may have played his last game in purple, but not quite there yet, Phil. Daniil Hunter, I mean, we alluded to it weeks ago. Now we're seeing it play out that he's a no-show at voluntary, not mandatory, but voluntary off-season workout. So we'll see how that situation plays itself out. But on Dalvin, it's when, not if.
Yeah. There he is. Darren Doogie Wolfson. Inside information about your favorite Minnesota sports teams here on a Reckless Speculation Thursday.
All right, boys. Judd,
right,
they really
dudes.
got off the Gus bus last night. I can't believe that. I really can't believe that. That's not a second guess.
It's going to be discussed more.
Yeah.
And was discussed in depth on JHS last night.
Yeah,
so,
I'll listen. I'll listen back to it soon.
Yeah,
I can't believe they made that decision.
Some words of
Always
wisdom.
have to be the smartest people in the room. Oh,
Let
God.
it be.
All right, see you, boys.
All right, there he is. Darren Doogie Wolfson from the 5 Eyewitness News sports team. Real quick, let's keep it here for just a few minutes before Judd jumps on the Tom Bernard morning show to complain about the Wild and the Timberwolves this morning. TomBernardShow.com.
Who knows with Tom? Yeah, who knows with Tom? It's great. We'll probably talk about the Twins. I mean, the Twins, and they won.
The Twins won last night. They did. So I know you were glued. You guys were on Judd's hockey show duty, and I was on with Kyle Flagrant Howell's duty. But Judd, you did kind of peek in from afar at that game. I guess just from I guess I told Kyle this off the top of Flagrant Howell's. It turned into more of an Anthony Edwards coronation, even though they lost, than it turned it. Because how many episodes can we sit there and savage Karl Anthony Towns for doing the same thing game after game? Like, it just, we're beating a dead horse at some point. But I'm trying to balance the fans' feeling, justifiably so, of disappointment from an underachieving regular season. Then they lose the first play, and they've just been hanging by the skin of their teeth the whole season.
Yep.
And then they come in unprepared in game one, unprepared in the first half of game two, and then Anthony Edwards, with help from Gobert defense on Jokic, Cat did hit some shots in the third quarter. The energy was there, so they showed you we had the peak Timberwolves experience last night. The only thing missing was a blown double-digit lead. It was everything that you've been frustrated yet hopeful about this entire year on display for 2.5 hours last night. So I'm trying to balance. Well, they're down 0-2. They've largely played like crap in this series. They've largely underachieved after that blockbuster trade last summer. But Anthony Edwards remains an incredible beacon and ray of hope for the organization. He is 6 years away from his peak, and he's doing that last night on the road in a hostile environment. So I'm kind of torn how to feel about that game last night.
You know what? Last night was a microcosm of the entire season and how this team operates. And this is what I would say. Tim Connelly or whoever else is running this team this summer You need to look at this, and you don't. And I don't think that you can say. I think you're torturing the storyline by saying, well, like Duke said, well, I mean, you're not going to lose the 10 games again to bad teams. You're not going to do this. You're not going to do that. I think the chemistry of this team is awful, and I think it needs to be changed. And I also think that you need to put Ant in a place. See, I disagree with Doogie on Cat. Now, perhaps Cat will say, you know what? I'm not the one. Personally, I don't think he would, but let's just say he says that, okay? There's still a part of Ant that, as long as Cat is here, is gonna look at Cat and say, well, that is Cat. And it shouldn't take him as much as it takes him to say, screw it, it's my time, which he did in the second half. But when you dissect these first two games, and when you dissect that inexcusable start to the game last night, because that is inexcusable in a playoff game. December against the Hawks, okay, it's disturbing, not inexcusable. But when you look at how this team came out and played in the first game and then played in the first portion of the game last night, if you say, we can fix that, it's fine, I think you're absolutely crazy. So, but this goes beyond Cat. This is a team issue. This is you had no pride to start a playoff game. Like zero pride. And then you're like, Ant's like, screw it. I'll take over the game. That is not something that I think that you can look at. I mean, who on this team beyond Ant right now is young enough to justify, well, they'll learn. You got a lot of guys who should know better.
The guys who aren't playing, right? I mean, they do. That is one of the problems, that they're literally playing an 8-man rotation and leaning on Jalen Noel to give you 23 minutes. But I agree that I don't think let's just assume that if everyone stays. First of all, Gobert's going to miss some games.
Yep.
Cat's not going to miss 50. But the Wolves were 500 with him, 500 without him. They're 60 games under 500 all time when Karl Anthony Towns plays. It's just a very telling sample size at this point, and the 16 playoff playing games and 8 complete embarrassing clunkers, and he's just getting clowned on TNT after every single game. I just don't know. I'm not going to, I feel like I'm just piling on the guy at this point, so I'm going to stop. But how many more seasons do you need to see before you have a conclusion? And I would say this for Karl. If there's kind of an internal struggle about, you can kind of feel it with him. He knows he should be performing better, but he's very prideful. He doesn't really want to level with people. There's just it just feels incongruent, I guess, because sort of the expectations that he puts on himself, that the fans put on him, and kind of where he's at with these big games. But there's something very liberating for players, Kevin Love, Chris Bosh, when you were supposed to be one thing and you just weren't, with the Raptors, with the Timberwolves, and then you find yourself in a situation where you can just be free of it all, right? You can just be the third guy and use your talents, and you can, and like Doogie said, well, but look, he had these other great games in the playoffs, and that's fine. Like if you're Chris Bosh or you're Kevin Love, and you got LeBron, and you got Dwayne Wade and Kyrie Irving, and hopefully at some point in this case, you've got your Anthony Edwards, and then whoever's the second guy, and then maybe a Karl Anthony Towns in a perfect world in 2 or 3 years is your third guy. I don't know that can happen here. You can get away with the narrative of, okay, he was pretty bad for a couple games, but look what he did in the bounce back game 4. When you're the third guy, we can highlight the times where you popped. When you're the number one guy, it's pretty embarrassing to sit here and be like, well, I know there's been 8 garbage games, but look at look at the game 5, right? It has to be every single night. And that was the most encouraging thing about Anthony Edwards. And he has flaws in his game. And he was pretty terrible in the 3 games before that. He's also 21 years old. But he just said, I'm going to be the best player on a court with a potentially 3-time MVP, with Jamal Murray dropping 40, with 2 Supermax players on my own team, in a hostile road environment. I'm going to be the best player tonight. He just decided that as a 21-year-old. And I think that was so telling for the future of this franchise. But you got to support him going forward. That's what I worry about.
And don't sleep on Chris Finch, too. Ant said in the postgame last night, and this is an indictment, in game 2 of a playoff game, I think Krasinski said, what went wrong at the start? And he's like, man, we didn't come out and execute the game plan. All right? If you're the head coach, your job is not only to have a game plan, but it's to make damn sure your players execute it. And this again was like, he's like, we just weren't executing the game plan, and then we started to. Okay, I'm not going to just say, well, I mean, that's the play. If you can't get your game plan across to your players to execute in the playoffs, that's an indictment of you, Chris Finch. So, like, there's a lot of things here, Phil, that go beyond Cat as well that I think need deconstruction and don't need to be dismissed as, well, next year we'll come back and get them. Because I think if you say that and you run this thing back, I think you are setting yourselves up in many ways for failure. And then you're going to be halfway through again and be like, what happened? And, oh, by the way, there's a very good chance Naz Reid's not back too. So Naz, who was fantastic and I think is a true professional, if he's gone, it very well gets worse.
And just the whole revisionist history of Wolves fans just being like, oh, well, they wouldn't lose 10 games of the bottom 5 teams next year. Oh, they won't have all these injuries that happened. Oh, well, Towns is without 3 of his core players. That is not an excuse for one of the supposed best players in the NBA to just not exist for the first 2 games of this playoff series and in half his career playoff games. Like, oh, they could have taken Jamal Murray over Chris Dunn. We can go on and on and on and on about how Wolves have had misfires in the draft or bad luck that's happened to them. Other teams have prevailed. Other teams have figured out ways to still win games. And Towns has done this now for year 8, going into year 9. We know who he is. He's never going to be the guy that can overcome the adversity and lead you to wins. It just it won't happen.
Yeah, and if he explodes in game 3, let's not mistake that for okay, now he's finally figured it out, right? The complaint, and justifiably, has never been that he can't put up big numbers in a basketball game or in a playoff game. The complaint has been he can't do it consistently like his peers do, and that's what's needed from him. So I guess to put a bow on this whole thing, Anthony Edwards, major beacon of hope, but I don't know how much more you need to see of this after 8 seasons of Karl Anthony Towns before you decide he either needs to be moved or decidedly put in a place here that is not one of the top 2 slots in terms of stature, leadership, running an offense, etc.
Finch was apologizing for him again last night postgame, though. I got to do this for him. I got to do that. Here's the common theme. I'll make this as simple as possible. The common theme is this. Your head coach and one of your star players might both be 2s. Chris Finch might be a good assistant, really good assistant, and Karl might be a really good secondary player to a star in a role that he can accept it.
Yep. I think no matter what here, and we'll see how the rest of the series plays out, this is actually great experience for Anthony Edwards regardless. Like, just getting into a 7-game series as a 21-year-old for the second straight year is great. But to me, the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth priorities starting this summer should be Anthony Edwards is the centerpiece of this franchise for the next however many years.
Yep.
How can we support him?
Yep.
And then I would start asking a bunch of questions. Is the coach supporting him enough? Are they running enough pick and roll and letting him go downhill? Or are they trying to be, like, as Dane Moore points out all the time, are they trying to be too much of a free-flowing ball movement offense, which is great sometimes. But when you have a freight train like Anthony Edwards who can just come off pick and roll and weave between 4 defenders and get to the rack, you should run more of that. And they did in the second half yesterday. Is the coach supporting Anthony Edwards? Is the system supporting Anthony Edwards? Are Anthony Edwards' teammates the right teammates to allow him to thrive and allow him to make plays, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll see. I know you got to get to Tom Bernard here, but we'll do a pie chart of blame for a game 2 Wild Ball. I know where I would put my biggest slice of pie. Kind of watching that game from afar last night.
You're not going to be shocked by
what the hell was.
Well, we'll discuss.
Okay, and then Purple Daily. So after we got done with Purple Daily yesterday, Mike Florio drops another Trey Lance Vikings bomb report. So we'll follow up on that. Random Viking of the week. It's a big day here on SKOR North. If you missed the 2 post-game shows late in the night, if you went to bed at some point, you can check out Flagrant Howls and Judd's Hockey Show, reacting immediately after the Wolves and Wild games on the SKOR North YouTube channel and also on the Minnesota Sports with Mackey and Judd podcast feed. We'll catch you for a pie chart of blame also today.